Warning: Kingdom Death contains mature content, be it in its story themes and or its images. While while videos involving Kingdom Death Monster may not contain specifically mature content in them, the game does, and thus, if these videos generate interest for it, you've been warned that that is what it will lead to. If this does not bother you, please enjoy the video. Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome to this painting and assembly video for Kingdom Death Monsters Pinup Order Knight, based off the Twilight Order Knight. Right? This is a 14-piece model that was mostly easy to assemble, well, at least compared to the other two models that I've put together for Kingdom Death so far. Majority of the base was three separate pieces, as this time, as opposed to two as the other ones have been, or the other one, a recent one has been. And the legs, bust was a separate piece. Both the arms, the weapon was attached to one of the arms, and as you can see, these knee pads, which were the most difficult part. I actually ended up dropping one at one point in time, and had to search for it. It's really, really tiny. The head itself was attached to the cape. It's actually embedded in there. It's not a separate piece. But there's a little piece of cloth that goes across the front. The knee pads themselves, beyond also being really tiny and falling off, did offer some issues, as the right knee pad, or as you're looking at it from here, the left one, ended up encrusted in glue a bit, so I had to scrape some of that away before I could get to painting it. I sadly only noticed it after priming, in fact, so that probably wasn't all that great. But here we go, continuing with that and almost finishing. The sword fit nicely into the other hand, and unlike the before the wall, I like how the hands are closer to being appropriate on the weapon, and as opposed to before the wall where she's holding it by the bottom. So here's the model post primer. I went with white, as I do with most of the character or character-like models, and here I am starting with the flesh. I decided to go with the palest flesh possible that still resembled a flesh color. I wanted her to look somewhat sickly pale by the time it was done, and unfortunately, as you'll see at the end, it came out more dirty than sickly, but still was it was very close. As much as this is a pinup model, well, there isn't actually a lot of flesh exposed. The tabard and leggings take up a lot, as well as the fact that the cloak base and arm guards basically cover up the shoulders and arms, and most of the head is covered, although the face is entirely exposed. Now, I end up having to redo the flesh itself multiple times, especially around her left side and, well, her ass, um, because I ended up getting black on it a lot. And speaking of black, here I am starting with it. I don't actually get to the cape yet. I go on to the leggings primarily, and this still takes a bit, as I'm trying to get all the little details and not be too sloppy with my base coat, as I've referred to in my past videos as the slop base coat, which I did in this one a lot as well. But this model also had a lot of small details, so I wanted to not, and also I wanted to paint with gold, which I find really hard to paint onto black. One of the reasons I went with priming the model white. Beyond just wanting it to look bright, but yeah, it's either either paint 3 to 5 coats or paint 1 or 2 coats of gold. And then the cape here, I actually ended up doubling the speed for the video because honestly, this part takes a while, and I didn't want to take up too much time. This is the largest portion of the or largest surface area of the model, if I'm correct. The base is the close second. Uh, the cape ends up like beyond the fact that it's a large surface area. It takes a while because, as you can see, I have to get in there, and I'm trying not to then repaint the flesh, which also, like I stated with the gold, I wanted to make sure to paint onto white, not onto black. The parts in which I do have to paint over black, I have to do it 1 or 2 times as is. Like a single time each time would have been okay, but you know. Then again, I end up painting over a good chunk of the face right here by accident, and partially on purpose, as the eyes are actually meant to be black instead of white, with gray for pupils. So the tabard is also painted black, and that and her thong are pretty much the only actual clothing she's wearing that doesn't qualify as an accessory. But again, this is qualified as a pinup model, so whatever. Welcome to Kingdom Death's extra stuff. I honestly got this model purely for the OCD, as I stated in my unboxing video, like the other pinup video models I have for game components. This is the one that kind of makes me go, because it's her thong, but hey, it's got actual game mechanics and it's a silly item. Also, of the three pinup models I did get, this is one of the two that I actually like aesthetically. The Pinup Warrior of the Sun is the other one, which should be my next video. But yeah, so here I am painting the thong. Yay, getting between those butt cheeks. It was a lot easier than it was for the before the wall model, actually. I don't know why, but it just was. I think it was even thinner this time. And there's the eyes. Personally, I like the way the model looks until I touch up the face, but that's not the end, how it looks heavily shaded and dark, but that's not the end goal that I'm looking for. If I wanted to make it seem like there was a light source behind her that was bright, that wasn't so bright that it completely eclipsed her face, then I would have kept it that way. So the ring of the base is the last major bit of black that I end up doing, and I also ended up double speeding the video for this, as well as the rest of the base when I get around to that. So here I move on to the bronze color, which is majority of the plating on the model. I wanted to go with the darker bronze, but honestly I couldn't find a replacement to what had become a very watered down paint that I have. This ended up working after the ink wash, but beforehand I was very hesitant and was still trying to off camera, trying to apply the darker bronze in place of it, and ended up actually getting frustrated at one point and stopping for days because of the lack of said paint. But again, at the end of the day, this ended up working. I leave that little strip above her heel unpainted on both the feet, like you can see on that one. At first, because I wanted to try, it looked like it was supposed to be a leather strap, but when I painted it brown, it didn't come out well, and I wasn't really too much of a fan, so I just painted the back of it bronze as well. This ends up being the color that I use for, as I said, any of the plating. So I started with the shoulder plate. It's not just the boots, but I also use it for various parts of the arm that I've already painted, and I go back to touch this up multiple times, as this was the paint that rubbed off the easiest. Now, onto the base, which, like I said, I ended up doubling again. When it's just the gray color, this base actually looks really horrible, but I know that after the ink wash, it would turn out far much better, which it did, and then the highlight improved it even more. But until I see the artwork, I'm probably going to be painting all the bases for this game the same color, unless there's some unique base, because the stone faces make me think of a granite kind of stone, where it's going to be a dark, or like some dark gray or light gray at most. I know that I've seen some artwork of a desert of many faces. It's so much, and that they're so small, smaller than they are on this one, and to the point in which it looks like it's a sand, and it looks like it's all sand at a distance, and thus why it's referred to as a desert of faces. So I use the same gray on the hilt and pommel of the sword, that being the handle and the end piece at the bottom. Uh, the sword actually ends up having more variety of color on it than the rest of the model combined. Um, oh, I also did use it for the crossguard as well, at least the outside. The stone face on both sides of it ends up being a lighter gray. I mention that now because it will be for so short. Now here I'm painting the cloth on the hilt of the sword, which I decided to go with actually an undead flesh sort of color. And from there, I end up pulling out the light gray, which, as I said, I will be using on the stone face, but it's also what I painted her hair color. I will later be adding it to her eyebrows. I believe I do that off camera and then redone in the highlight. Or no, I use white for the highlight. Next up, I end up I believe either reinforcing the bronze or I'm moving on to the leather for the arms. Yep, this is definitely the reinforcing of the bronze. I'm sorry to sound a little hazy with this model, as there were a lot of times where I would constantly forget things with the arms themselves, because they have a lot of little bits to them that are all pretty much the same color. In fact, if you watch carefully, you'll be able to see the fact that her right arm isn't even finished by the time I cut away to fix up the base coat, because I had completely forgotten about it by the time I stopped recording. So onto the blade, the Twilight blade itself. It's done in a very bright silver, which is the brightest baseline metallic I have, and it will be re-highlighted in that color as well. But this is the only part of the model that ends up using that color, I believe. Majority of the other metallic, silver or iron metallic bits end up being my mid-range metal. There's actually a little bit of the arm that was painted earlier, or that is the darkest metal to represent some chainmail. And here's me painting the face, and then I move on to the cloth or leather. I think it's more of string because of the two little bits on either side of the sword. And I ended up going with a light tan for this. This is normally what I use to highlight my leathers. I actually will later end up highlighting this with orange because it was the only color that I thought that would come out decently. I had to actually repaint in between the strings to make sure that it actually was clearly separating them, but for the most part, this ends up being just straightforward color. Now, I did say earlier that the sword itself has more colors than the rest of the model combined. I should say it has more colors than any other single piece, and then I remember the face, which has quite a few. So now I finally get around to using the gold on the model, which is pretty much being used for all the filigree of the metal plating. It also ends up being used for the uh, bracers on the forearm side, and also the hem of the leggings. Now, it was around here that I actually got a little frustrated with the model and ended up stopping for a while. Well, because it was the contrast between the gold and the bronze that was making me frustrated that I didn't have the darker bronze. Eventually, I still ended up sticking with both the bronze and the gold, and this is my duller of two golds. I use the brighter one when I highlight it later, as this also ends up being as this gold ends up also being the highlight for the bronze as well. And I apologize for how long this takes, but there are a lot of like I had to paint around each of those rings around the boots themselves, little by little, and then also various parts of the forearms, the hands, and also the leggings, which ended up being a massive pain. As multiple times I would spill back and forth between the black, the flesh, and the gold, well, until I would get it right. So there was a lot of repainting around there. Oh, those knee pads. That's the one that's actually ended up encrusted. As you can see, I managed to clean it up quite well. I think it's still a little encrusted, but not enough to lose the detail, just enough that when you get real close, you can tell, oh, hey, I used a bit too much glue. Whoops. All that shining gold. I know the monsters for this game are going to go a lot quicker because they're going to be done in my darker shade or darker style of painting in order to emphasize the fact that they are the monsters in the dark rather than the people, huddling to the light. Even the Sunstalker, when I eventually get that, will still be still be the dark shade because as much as it's all, hey, I'm going to eat a bunch of light, it's still an evil creature of I'm going to kill you. The Twilight Knights, for those that don't know, are a specific group within, or sort of group within the Kingdom Death setting. And I won't get into any spoilers here, but for the most part, at a certain point in the game, a player can gain a Twilight Sword and train with it. And Twilight Knights themselves are basically we have become so powerful and are constantly contending with the living entity or sentiency within our sword. The item actually says sentient, which means you have to have 3 insanity or higher to use it. That we basically have become one with the darkness. We survive on our own. No first hero kind of style which is the first was the first announced expansion with the 1.5 Kickstarter, where they send out an individual person for the hunt. No, 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 no. This is I don't have a settlement to go back to. I just survive on my own. So here I am moving on to the metal, the mid-range metal. I already did majority of the belt by this point, including the little studs on it. I end up doing, as you can see, a lot of the gloves. A thing that doesn't end up being painted later, or seen painted later, is the studs on the boots. So from here, I've jumped straight to the ink wash. As off camera, I did a lot of painting for the model in detail as I needed my painting rig out of the way. The ink wash went over pretty well in this case. Again, I think it muddies the flesh a bit, but it still gets into the crevices right to emphasize, shadowing and everything. But the rest of the model turns out just fine, in my opinion. And in fact, the face ended up looking really good as well. It was just the body and the legs that kind of bothered me. The base here ends up looking amazing, in my opinion, which is what I would hope would end up happening after I ink it. Yeah, here's me soaking up some of the excess ink. I needed to redo the eyes after this, which was, oh, I so could have screwed that up. So I move on to the same gray. Now I'm on to highlighting. I'm using the same gray from the bases to highlight any of the black, as all the black, heck, except technically the belt, was cloth. So I thought I'd give it that look. And even then, the belt itself was a leather, so I was fine with also highlighting that. If it was boots, I might have thought about doing a gloss varnish instead. And then here's the light gray for the bases. I had to do this a couple for the faces on the base. I had to do this a couple times to get them to stand out, but it still ended up working. And then reapplying it to the same places on the sword, or the same color used on the sword. Now here I'm actually highlighting the blade, I believe. I had some trouble keeping it in frame. And then a couple little dots for the face, which ended up working real nice. Then I move on to the flesh. The flesh I actually had to touch up between... I ended up touching up between various varnish coats. It's something I don't really like to do, but I ended up doing it because I didn't think that they came out that well. And then there's me touching up the headband, which I don't believe I mentioned earlier. I actually painted the straps blue as they are in the art image. And then there's me applying the orange for the strap around the sword. I forget what color I highlighted the cloth around the middle, but it still ended up working. Then here's the duller gold being applied to the bronze and reapplied to the gold as well because it's just going to get highlighted a brighter color. And I love how it makes everything stand out here. Oops, and there's a big amount of off camera, but I know stuff's being painted. I think this might be when I'm actually applying the gold little by little. Yep, this is when I'm applying the gold, and as you can see, it shines even brighter. So from here, I end up finishing up the gold, and move on to the silver, and then the little headpiece there, to finish it up. Well, that's everything, folks. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, feel free to press the like button. If you didn't, go ahead and press the dislike button, but try to leave a constructive comment. Also, feel free to comment in general. If you think other people will enjoy the video, feel free to share. If you'd like to see other videos like this, or my unboxing videos, or my Let's Plays, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.